Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're embarking on a bit of a forensic investigation, really digging into the complex, invisible architecture behind why we buy the things we buy. I mean, whether it's a massive industrial procurement or just grabbing a candy bar at the grocery store, there is an entire hidden framework guiding that choice. We're going to break down that framework today, so you can see exactly what's happening behind the curtain of commerce. Here is the mental map for our investigation. First, we'll look at the broad, hidden buying forces. Second, we'll dive into the decision behavior matrix. And third, we'll zoom in on the specific cast of characters pulling the strings.
So I want to start by challenging you with a pretty simple question. Are you really in control of your purchases? Seriously, think about it for a second. When you're standing in an aisle or when you finally hit that add to cart button online, it feels like a completely isolated act of free will, right? You wanted it, you bought it. But as our source material reveals, that final click, it's the culmination of immense, unseen pressures. Actually, scratch that. It's rarely ever just you making a choice in a vacuum. It's more like a giant puzzle coming together all at once. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the hidden buying forces. There is literally a tremendous amount of pressure placed on every single choice you make, governed by 4 overarching structural factors. First step is cultural. This is where your culture and subcultures actively define your baseline values and ethics. Then there's the social factor, where your peer groups and family shape your roles and statuses. Next are personal factors, your age, occupation, lifestyle. Obviously, this looks very different if you're a corporate buyer sourcing tons of industrial steel versus a retail shopper hunting for vintage sneakers, but it filters absolutely everything you consider. And finally, psychological factors, which completely dictate the parameters of a purchase before you even realize you want to buy something.
So the crucial point here is that while cultural and social forces operate on this huge macro level, these psychological drivers operate deep within your own mind. We're talking about your internal motivations, the learning you've accumulated over your lifetime, your deeply held beliefs, and your shifting attitudes. When you face a buying decision, your brain is instantly referencing these psychological drivers. They basically act as your internal compass, seamlessly guiding you towards a specific choice based on what you believe, what you've learned, and what truly motivates you beneath the surface. Let's move on and see how this builds into Section 2, the decision behavior matrix. Welcome to the battlefield of choice. To really understand this battlefield, we first have to look at the concept of involvement. On one end of the spectrum, you've got high-involvement decisions. Think about signing a massive industrial contract for a new factory or, buying your first home. The stakes are massive. On the exact opposite end, you have low-involvement decisions. This is buying your regular morning coffee or tossing a pack of gum on the conveyor belt. The stakes are practically zero. And as you'll see, these two extremes completely alter our behavior. Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is what happens when we cross those involvement levels with the actual differences between brands. We perfectly map out 4 completely distinct buying behaviors. If you have high involvement and significant brand differences, boom, you get complex buying. If it's low involvement but significant differences, you get variety-seeking buying, where you're switching things up just for the fun of it. But let's look a bit closer at the other 2 quadrants here, where brand differences are actually pretty few. Right here, we have dissonance-reducing buying. This happens when your involvement is incredibly high, meaning it's a huge, expensive, or really infrequent purchase, but to your eyes, the differences between the available brands are basically non-existent. Just imagine the anxiety in this situation. You're making a massive commitment, yet everything looks exactly the same. You are desperately looking for absolutely anything to reduce that dissonance, that internal tension, simply because the psychological stakes of getting it wrong are so incredibly high. Now, contrast that with habitual buying. This is the ultimate autopilot mode. Your involvement is exceptionally low, and there are very few perceived differences between the brands. Think about your own everyday autopilot purchases. When was the last time you agonizingly weighed the pros and cons of different brands of table salt or paper towels? You don't. You just grab what you always grab. Those psychological drivers have essentially gone to sleep, and habit has completely taken the wheel. All right, bring in the energy back up. Let's zoom in on Section 3, the cast of characters. Because ultimately, buying is a team sport. Whenever a buying process happens, there is a distinct cast of characters involved, all moving through this chronological flow of shared decisions. First, you have the initiator, the person who actually realizes a need exists. Then the influencer, who sways the outcome. The decider, who makes the final call. The buyer, who executes the transaction. And finally, the user, who consumes the product. Sure, sometimes one person plays all the parts, but very often they're entirely split up.
Think of a tired parent acting as the buyer for a spectacularly loud, flashing toy, where the toddler is the initiator, influencer, and ultimate user. The parent is just executing the transaction, definitely much to their own later regret.
And this brilliantly illustrates a central thesis from the source. Decision-making is fundamentally a multi-layered, shared process. Even in a massive industrial setting, you've got engineers initiating, financial officers influencing, executives deciding, and procurement agents buying, all for the factory floor workers who are the actual users. The whole architecture relies heavily on this network of shared input. So, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on today. The next time you find yourself making a purchase, whether it's just grabbing a box of cereal for your pantry or signing a massive software contract for your company, stop for a second and ask yourself, which invisible force actually put that item in your hands, and which role are you really playing?